game players have excessive issues. A lot of psychologists and psychiatrists are not prepared to call it an addiction. I don't really care whether we call it an addiction or not. I'm not going to quibble over terminology, but it looks right now that it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 8% of people have excessive use problems. Now, the younger you go, the higher that percentage gets.
Oh, really?
Sure.
Really?
I mean, that 8% figures as a population as a whole. Now, I can't quote you off the top of my head, but it is somewhere in the neighborhood of 1/5 of young people under the age of 18 are believed to have excessive cyber use issues.
So is there a...
Whether it's, if you excuse me, whether it's video games, Facebook,
Okay.
MySpace, texting, the whole gamut of cyber behaviors.
Okay. And so is there a profile, a typical age, sex that, you know, is typically more male than female, or a peak age that you think is the most susceptible to addiction?
Well, I can't, that's a question that I can't answer because actually the age of, average age of video gamers has gone up steadily.
Oh, really?
Yeah. A lot of World of Warcraft, you've heard a lot about this game, World of Warcraft. Some people call it the crack cocaine of video games. Really? A good many of the players in that game are adults. Because it requires a monthly maintenance fee and a credit card. So it is easier for parents to pull the plug on that one, but a lot of these players are adults. Certainly, traditionally, this has been more of a male problem, but now they're finding that gender gap is decreasing, and a lot more women and girls are having this problem as well. A lot of the girls that I see, they're textaholics. I had a girl that came to me, she had a 1.3 grade point average and talked about how school was boring and she couldn't pay attention. She came to my study groups and I watched her text. I mean, this girl was like lightning on the phone. And I told her mother, I said, you know, you may want to check out the text bill. And this girl was sending out 300 texts a day.
A day?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so a lot of these were during the school hour to friends of hers who were also in school.
In class?
Yeah. So we're seeing, and a lot of girls are into the Facebook, and they're into the Facebook, you know, Farmville, Cafe World. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, perhaps thousands of these applications.
So why is it that some people become cyber junkies and others don't? What is it about? You said, is it really a matter of brain chemistry?
Well, I think it is. I think to some, I'm a little hesitant to answer that in strict terms because I think there's a lot of research that needs to be done. But I do believe that some people have brain chemistries and perhaps simply cerebral hardwiring that make them more susceptible to the escape and avoidance that comes with spending too much time in the cyber world. If I take myself as an example, I'm a creative person. I was very bored in school, but for various reasons was able to do well in school. But the older I got, the harder it got to keep that going. So people who are bored with routines, people who long for adventure, novelty, excitement, these are people who are going to be more prone to excessive cyber use. Now that is a particularly disturbing statement when one considers how much we need creativity. You know, here we are in the midst of a massive socio and economic shift in our culture that most recently has led to an economic meltdown. We need creativity. We need these types of people to be using their skills for positive uses rather than really piddling them away in cyberland.
So is cyber addiction different than other kinds of addictions, or is it basically just your, you know?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I think, again, we have to come back to delineating substance addiction versus behavioral addiction.
Okay.
So if you take food, food is a necessity. So if somebody has food issues, you know, they're overeater, you have to have food. You can't just totally go cold turkey. Well, the cyber world is somewhat similar because you need a computer to do most jobs. You need to have some functionality in the cyber world in order to perform most jobs. You know, this might be a good time to read a passage.
Oh, sure. I'd love to have you do that.
Because, you know, when we talk about this type of addiction, it gets to the essence of reward in the brain. What do we find pleasurable? How does pleasure register in the brain? And how is that experience different for different people? Now, it's a very complex set of neural pathways, but let us focus today on one neurotransmitter called dopamine. And dopamine is a neurotransmitter that's involved in many, many things, including movement, and that's why people with Parkinson's disease have trouble with it's a dopamine-related illness. But also it's involved in concentration, it's involved in attention, and pleasure, our experiences of pleasure. So we find that people who suffer from addiction, chemical addictions or behavioral addictions, have a couple things possibly going wrong in their brain. Number one, they have faulty dopamine receptors, which means their cells are not quite getting that dopamine latching on in the proper way, or they just don't have enough dopamine receptors in their system to do the job. So they need something else to get more dopamine going to get a sensation of pleasure. So here, and of course, more dopamine is going to lead to more attention, more motivation temporarily. So let me read from this passage. The possibility for increasingly satisfying rewards and exploration directly affects dopamine levels. As the behavior gets reinforced with a surge of dopamine, some cyber users begin to relate to the game or their other cyber behavior in an increasingly compulsive manner. Successful video game designers certainly exploit this dopamine-mediated reality, whether it is their intention or not. Although most of the research on the role of brain in addiction is focused on substance abuse, gambling, or overeating, many recent scientific studies point to drastic increases in dopamine levels from cyber addictions as well. In one study, which was done in England, the human brain was shown to release dopamine while participants were playing video games that involved shooting enemy tanks. The tank-killing success of the player was proportional to the amount of dopamine released. Wow. Another study showed great success, very interesting, treating cyber-based addiction with a medication called naltrexone that acts on the brain's reward system and has also been used in treating alcoholism.
Oh.
So I could go on and bore you with the biology of it, but we're starting to see that there are similarities to other more widely studied addictions.
That's really interesting. Thank you for that. So if I'm listening to the show and hearing you describe this problem, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, I think he's talking about me and or someone that I love. How can I know for sure? And what can I do about it?
Well, the answer to that question depends on the severity. So if we sort of look at the problem from a life cycle perspective, if you're dealing with a pre-adolescent, then it is important to incentivize behavior, to make the access to the cyber world a privilege. So when you notice a problem with gaming, you're probably noticing as well not a lot of attention going to homework, not a lot of attention going to household chores. And so you may want to incentivize those behaviors and have those behaviors lead to cyber use. Now, along with that, there are many, many computer management devices. If you simply put computer management device into Google, you'll come up with a whole list of things. And there are even some nonprofit parent support groups that have devices for use. You can plug your computer into these devices and it will regulate the time that your child has. Now, what we find is that when we start getting these problems persisting in adolescence, that there's often another issue underneath it. A lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, a lot of ADHD. I've had many kids whose parents have pursued my services because of school performance only to find out, and video game issues, only to find out later that there was an ADHD problem that was undiagnosed. I have had this is a very unique finding. I have had several folks who brought their children to me for excessive, usually video game behavior, who then turned out to be bipolar. And I find that these folks are very prone to World of Warcraft, RuneScape, and other such what we call massively multiplayer online role-playing games, because they're played by literally millions of people across the world. So when we find with people who are older that the excessive cyber behaviors are often an escape or avoidance from some other issue. So it's important, I think, in most cases, to not view it in a vacuum. And because of that, it may be time to seek some professional help, depending on the extreme nature of it. Now, let's be honest. You know, I don't want everybody who watches this show to go out and panic. You know, all teenagers play video games. For many adults, it's a frequent and enjoyable source of entertainment. So if you have a teenager that's doing that to the detriment of other things in his or her life, then maybe it's time to restrict playtime. But if you have a student who's getting good grades, perhaps is on the swim team, and you know, doing well otherwise, and he or she plays video games all weekend, that's not so atypical for adolescents these days.
And at least they're home and you know where they are and they're not, you know.
So yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they're safe.
And in that case, you as a parent, you might want to learn how to play the game too, so that you could be clued in to an aspect of your child's life that you otherwise might not be aware of, and it might allow for some connection.
Well, this is my last question for you, Kevin. If I am a parent, parents, you know, when kids have problems, parents often ask themselves, where did I go wrong? Are there things that parents can do wrong that can contribute to this addiction?
Well, yes, and I think you already alluded to it. You said, well, at least we know they're home. And that gets to an issue where parents use the cyber world as a babysitter, as a child monitor. It sounds great. Well, at least I know he's home. At least I know she's home. And so maybe the fact that he or she is home is part of the problem. Maybe he or she has social anxiety, and that's why he or she is excessively making use of the offerings of the cyber world. So I think it's important to be aware, because most parents are not, they're like, you know, some parents are involved, but a lot of parents are like, oh, I don't know what the heck she does down there. It's some Dungeons and Dragons game. Well, get involved. You know, don't assume that you can't understand what's going on. Don't assume that there's not some value in it for you, because it could very well be that let's talk about a video game. It could be the nexus of a connection between you and your child.
That sounds like really good advice. I'm sorry we're running out of time, but I just want to thank you so much for coming. It's been really informative, and I hope very helpful to our viewers. And I'm just wondering, are you going to be doing any other readings soon?
Yes, on October 29th, I will be at Borders in Birmingham at 7 p.m. It's a Friday. It's 6 weeks away.
Great. Well, I really wish you the best of luck, Kevin, and thank you again for coming in.
I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Great.